referring to a futuristic time, a time when these things will take place. We can all acknowledge that while we might get glimpses of some of these things being true right now, most of what we're going to talk about today are hopeful things that we anticipate, that we yearn to see in this world, but we may not have gotten there yet. So Hashem malach tagel haaretz, let the world, let the earth have gila, have tremendous joy, an outward expression of joy. Yismechu iyim rabim, let even the most far-flung islands, iyim is a word which means islands in Hebrew, could be referring to just a geographic concept, the idea that something is the most far-flung. It's just like the biggest distance from here, like the way we might refer to, let's say, the North Pole or something. Like it's just so far you can't even picture it. So the most far-flung islands, or it could specifically be referring to what we imagine an island, how it exists, that it's really separate from the rest of the world. And so even in a place that you would think didn't get the message that Hashem is king, because how would they have gotten the message from everyone else? They're not part of, the rest of the world necessarily, culturally or politically. But even there, the message is clear. In the many, many islands, in the many places, the human beings that you don't even know exist on this earth, let them all rejoice in the fact that Hashem is the king. Anan va'arafel svivav. There are clouds and fog, dense clouds, svivav, that surround him. Tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso. Yet we know that his seat, his throne is founded upon tzedek and mishpat, righteousness and justice. So it's interesting that the translation of this lends itself very much to a real life understanding, a practical understanding, but also to one that is more metaphorical. And sometimes I find we need the mefarshim to guide us and help us understand how to make these ideas relatable. Here, I think it jumps off the page at you. If you can picture heavy, dense fog, and you can picture that surrounding a throne, let's say. So it's like, that it's there, and every once in a while you catch a glimpse of it, but your vision is really not good. Like, it doesn't matter. You cleaned your glasses, you wiped your windshield, and you're still really not able to see that thing because it's being clouded. It's being shrouded by this heavy cloud or this dense fog. So that's how many of the Mefarshim understand this idea. It's true, practically speaking, that there, when there is this heaviness in the weather, although today it's hard to picture because the sky is so blue and it's so beautiful. But when there is a heaviness in the clouds, a gray, you just can't see well. Nothing looks crisp. Nothing looks clear. That's true on a very practical level. But I think this is an easy one to sort of transfer to the emotional, psychological realm, maybe the spiritual realm, wherein when things seem unclear, when things are dark, when there is not a lot of light, so rest assured that the kisei of Hashem is still running this world with righteousness and with justice. And I think this is something that, as I mentioned, it's so relatable, this idea that we might know intellectually that Hashem is in charge, but it gets very, very complicated when things are dark, right? When our judgment gets clouded, our vision gets clouded, because the things we're seeing are really confusing. The world is a topsy-turvy, upside-down place. You just have to check the news and you see, a country like Russia being on the Security Council and just, minor or major things like that are just so, what do you mean? There can't possibly be any righteousness or justice in this world if that's what is being promoted. And yet here we have this acknowledgement. No. It's never clear. It's almost by design. Anan va'arafel svivav. Hashem conducts this world in a way where he has created distance. He has created a blur, a fog. You can't see him clearly, but know that tzedek u'mishpat mechon kiso. He is always conducting himself and conducting the world in a way that is righteous and just, even though from our perspective, it is clouded in mystery. It's not clear. It's quite dark. And yet, eish lefanav telech. He guides with fire. This could easily be, if we say that this parak was written by Moshe, this could easily be a reference to the fact that the Jewish people were led through the desert by a pillar of fire, right? Which was Hashem's sort of representative. That's how he revealed himself to the Jews of the desert at night, was through fire. Eish lefanav telech utlahet saviv tzara. But while the fire was leading the Jewish people and was a sign of clarity, a sign of hope, a sign of reliability, for the rest of our enemies, right, for the rest of the nations who sought to cause us harm, for them, the fire had a very different meaning. It burned them. It ate them up. And that is something that we relate to very much. The idea that what could be good for one person is not so good for another. Fire is like that. We know water is like that. Things where the uses can be so productive and constructive, but can also be so destructive. And so here, Moshe is referring to the fact, or David HaMelech is referring to the fact that the fire for the Jewish people was a sign of comfort. It actually was like the reminder Hashem is here, even though I know it's dark and it's cold in the desert at night, and it's a little scary because you can't even see where your enemies are coming from. So for the Jews, the fire was a sense of comfort, a pillar through which to guide our travels. But for the enemies of the Jewish people, it was a sign of their destruction should they bother the Jewish people. So for them, again, it was, I guess, a force of destruction, and for us, a force of protection. Heiru vrakav tevel. His lightnings, I guess that's a plural word, his lightnings bring light to the world. Heiru, they're me'ir, they bring light. One of the things you'll notice as we read through this parak is a lot of references to dark and light. Comes up quite a bit. So we've already seen the idea of fire, which is obviously one manifestation of light. We've seen the idea of anan and arafel, darkness, cloudiness, heaviness, and you'll see we'll come to some more. So the lightning, as you're all familiar, at night when there is a bolt of lightning, if you've ever been driving in a storm and you see a bolt of lightning out in the distance, you're like, oh, that was helpful. Now I can actually see, right? You're driving on a dark road and all of a sudden it literally is lightning, kishmo kenhu. It is really a cause of tremendous light. And I know a lot of electricity and all that, but it is really, it illuminates everything around, which is incredibly helpful in a time where things are otherwise very dark. So picture, right, lightning during the day doesn't quite have the same effect. But lightning at night is really a source of tremendous light. It shines a light, even though it's only momentary, but it's like a flash of inspiration. And when the world sees that, because you can't miss a bolt of lightning at night or in a storm, they are vatachel, they have chilchulim, they are trembling, they are terrified, because for a moment, they realize how wrong they are, or they realize they've been so hard on the Jews, or they've been so hateful towards the Jewish people. And they have these moments of like, uh-oh, we made a mistake. But the interesting thing about lightning is that the light doesn't stay, right? The lightning comes, you get a bolt and you see, and then you don't see, just like you didn't see before. And so I think that's a way to understand the following pasuk, which is that, again, when there's lightning, you can see, but for the nations of the world, and this could really apply to any human being who chooses not to capitalize on moments of inspiration, so it disappears. What could happen, or what should ideally happen, is when there is a bolt of lightning and a person has a burst of inspiration, they see something with clarity. Finally, what should happen? Harim kadonag namasu. Then someone who is as powerful and strong as a mountain should melt like wax. They should completely and totally, I don't say disintegrate, but their sense of self, their sense of whatever it was they thought they meant in this world, their importance, all of that, they will totally be put in their place. They would, the biggest, toughest, strongest human being, when they understand that they are but a nothing when compared with the power, the control of Hashem, that the real impact would be seen if the person recognizes their place. In other words, it's not just they had a burst of inspiration and then they go back to business as usual. This could be understood as a reference to the fact that the person was really impacted by that burst of inspiration. They really felt themselves, retracting a little bit, getting a bit more perspective. Milifnei Hashem, because they see in front of God, like they're really not as much as they thought they were. Milifnei Adon Kol Haaretz, right? Because they're in the presence of the master of the entire world. And this, I think this idea of a flash of light or a burst of inspiration, whatever, however you like to picture it, a light bulb or a bolt of lightning, that could easily represent moments of clarity, I think is an easy imagery to sort of attach ourselves to. Higidu hashamayim tzidko. The heavens themselves proclaim his tzedek, his righteousness. So many of the Mefarshim understand this to mean this happens through rain. I understood it to mean that the heavens are the place where the lightning happens. So that's how I understood it, but that's not how any of the Mefarshim understood it. They understood it that, like we mentioned before, in Shema, we see like those who do the right thing get a reward and those who don't get this punishment. And the way that is carried out in many cultures, or certainly in the land of Israel, is through the right rain at the right time versus no rain or the wrong rain at the wrong time. And that is one of the ways that Hashem manifests his righteousness, that he's keeping track and he's noticing our behavior and our decisions. And that is reflected in the amount of rain that falls. V'ra'u kol ha'amim kavodo. And because there is such a strong correlation, all the nations of the world recognize this fact that Hashem is running the world with a system of morals and ethics and justice. Yevoshu kol ovdei fesel hamit halalim be'elilim. And of course, what happens when everyone realizes that Hashem is running the world? He's all powerful and he's in control. He knows everything. Well, they're going to come to a realization that what they've been worshiping is nothing. And they're going to be humiliated. They're going to be embarrassed. Yevoshu, they will have busha. They will really be ashamed of themselves and the choices that they have made based on the fact that, deep down, they probably knew their gods weren't so powerful in the first place, right? Or they realize, in more modern terms, we're not just talking here about idols or graven images. We would be talking about anything that we put our hopes in, right? Any political ideology or a sports team or a designer brand or whatever a person's vices are, right? That they'll realize at some point when it becomes so clear that Hashem is the one who runs the world and that's all that matters. Well, they're going to be embarrassed that they had invested so heavily in something else. Hishtachavu lo kol Elohim. And that all those divine things that we had been investing ourselves in, or they had been investing themselves in, they're also going to bow down to Hashem. It's like the things that we have put so much hope in, they themselves are going to acknowledge that they're, at the end of the day, they don't have so much value. They don't have a lot of worth, certainly in contrast to Hashem. And then what's going to happen? Pasuk Chet. Sham'a vatismach Zion. When Zion hears this, right? When they hear that this is what's going on all over the world, that it's not just us, but everyone, and sometimes I'd say particularly us, but everyone, that we realize who's really in charge, there will be tismach and tagelna benot Yehuda, both within Zion and also here it's translated, benot could be referring to the cities of, or it could be referring to the people of, or certainly the women of Yehuda, leman mishpatecha Hashem, right? Because they realize that it's only your judgment that matters. There's going to be tremendous joy, tremendous happiness. So some of the Mefarshim, I would like to remember who it was, but I think actually Rifki Siegel in her book quoted this idea that you see from the contrast between Pasuk Zayin and Pasuk Chet that David HaMelech or Moshe are setting up for us a contrast. Those people who are happy, those people who have joy and are able to express joy are actually the opposite of those people who have shame and embarrassment. And she points out that when a person is embarrassed or has made a mistake and is feeling shameful, they retreat within themselves. They isolate themselves, right? There's something that they're ashamed of, embarrassed of, whatever it might be, a decision they made, something about something about themselves, their personality, their body, whatever it might be. When a person is experiencing shame or embarrassment, they hide. they isolate themselves. And that is actually the total opposite of what we have spoken about of simcha and gila, which by definition, we talked about simcha is a tzmicha, right? There's growth, there's expansiveness. When a person is happy, they want to share it with others. They specifically want to connect with other people. One is sort of an outgrowth of the other. She understands this to mean that these two emotions are totally opposite, which I think is a very beautiful and insightful point. There has been much written about and talked about with embarrassment, which is not the same as shame. I'm using them sort of interchangeably, but they're really not the same thing. If you're interested in hearing a lot about this, or where I learned a lot about it, that would be from Dr. Brene Brown, who is a very well-known researcher. She has tons of TED Talks and podcasts and all sorts of books that you can read. She calls herself essentially a shame researcher. She researches shame and how it impacts people and society as a whole. It's quite fascinating. And I think she would agree very much with this idea that it's impossible for a person who is feeling ashamed to also feel joy at the same time. It creates an environment where one can't have joy. And the way to understand this is L'man mishpatecha Hashem. This is all because this clarity comes about as a result of the mishpat of Hashem. So some of the Mefarshim understand, what does that mean, God's judgment? So it could mean he's finally taking revenge. The judgment refers to the nikama, the revenge he's taken on the nations of the world. That's what creates this clarity, that all those nations that were ridiculing the Jewish people, that were, condemning the state of Israel and the Jewish people as a whole, there's going to be revenge taken at some point. And that's going to bring us to a clarity of like, oh, they're ashamed, and we are so joyous. We're feeling the joy. And of course, the other way to understand mishpatecha is that it was within ourselves. It's not just that God exacted vengeance out there, but that we see the mishpat in here. We recognize that we've come out zakai, we've come out innocent, sort of like that feeling we have at the end of Yom Kippur, where we know no matter what we've done this past year, so long as we did our job on Yom Kippur, we have this guarantee that Hashem has forgiven us. And that is a real feeling of joy. The shame has been washed away, the shame of all of those al-chaitz and all those slachlanus and all of that, which we experience very intensely on Yom Kippur, where we really face our demons and face our misbehaviors. That shame actually gives way eventually to a feeling of joy when we know that we've come clean, we've owned our mistakes, and that we have a guarantee that we're going to be forgiven. That leads to tremendous joy, a real sense of simcha. Okay, pasuk tet. Ki ata Hashem elyon al kol haaretz, because Hashem, you are above everything else on this earth. Me'od na'aleta al kol Elohim. You are elevated, you are exalted above everything. Anything else that we might have worshipped doesn't even come close to you. You're above it all. Ohavei Hashem sinura. All of you who love Hashem, or we'll say those people who love Hashem, sinura, they must hate evil. Shomer nafshos chasidav. Hashem guards the lives, guards the souls of those who are his chasidim, his loyal ones. And miyad v'sha'im yatzilim, he saves them from the hands of the wicked. This pasuk, there is so much written about this pasuk and the next pasuk. So much written. I'm going to try to share some of the highlights of the things that that resonated with me. Let's talk about this idea of Ohavei Hashem and Sinura. So those people who love Hashem are simply incapable of having any feeling other than hatred towards evil. Because as many of the Mefarshim point out, in particular, the Maharam Arama, who I've quoted before, still don't have a really good sense of who he is, but he's quoted in this Sefer Mikdash Ma'at that I have on Tehillim. So he says something that we all know to be true about all relationships. We just sometimes forget that it's true in our relationship with Hashem also. When two people are in a relationship, so whatever is important to one is important to the other. If this makes you happy, well, then it makes me happy too. I don't particularly care about it inherently, but if it's important to you, then it's important to me. So says the Maharam Arama, when a person is in a love relationship with Hashem, if we love each other, and I know that Hashem can't stand evil, in the same way that I love what Hashem loves, I also have to hate what Hashem hates. And it's incompatible for me to be a lover of Hashem and anything but a hater of evil. Those two things just can't coexist. It's impossible. And he points out that this goes both ways, that since Hashem feels an allegiance, a desire to protect the Hasidim, you see how this goes both ways, right? He is going to protect us from the Rishaim, and we are on his side when it comes to feeling disdain towards Rishut, towards evil. I want to point out, actually, that there is a big difference in the two ways of understanding this first phrase, Ohavei Hashem Sinura, those who love Hashem hate evil. Rav Hirsch points out in classic Rav Hirsch fashion that the pasuk does not say Sinu Rishaim. It says sin ura, to hate evil, that there is never a reason, never an excuse, never a pretext in which a person should hate another human being. We hate the evil perpetrated by people who do bad things, but that we try not to get to a place where we actually hate human beings. And this is something that I find is very relevant when it comes up around Pesach, where you hear, in particular, younger children, but sometimes older children and sometimes adults talking with great hatred towards individuals, which makes sense, right? How could you not hate Paro in the Mitzrayim story, right? How could we not hate the taskmasters? How could we not hate the Hitlers and the Stalins and the Lenin and all of the Rishaim that we have all come to know through history? How could we not hate them? Well, says Rav Hirsch, you can hate their evil, but you're kind of wasting your energy if you hate the human. That's not really where it's at. Hashem, and this is a beautiful idea I saw from the Maharak Kohen. I don't know who that is either, but I want to give him credit, who says that what's true about our feelings towards evil is true about everything else when it comes to our service of Hashem. That the only thing that a human being is held accountable for is whether they took the first step or not. What happens after that, that's really not in your hands always. So long as we take the first step, he quotes the famous idea, Habal taher misayinoto, that when a person wants to purify themselves, Hashem helps misayinoto. He gives him siyua, he gives him siyata, right? He gives him help. And that what we're held responsible for is whether I did the first right step. Did I take that step towards wanting to come closer to Hashem? And so he applies this idea to the idea of hating evil. So if a person is a lover of Hashem, and by definition, they make themselves a hater of evil, then Hashem will make sure to save that person from evil. He will make sure that evil has no impact on him, has no negative effects on him, and he will save us from the hands of evil people. Sort of this idea that you're not really responsible for more than that, right? Get your emotions straight, get the thinking straight, make sure you are clear. And this is something that I find is harder and harder and murkier in a world where things, everything is okay according to one person or another. You just have to ask enough people and you'll find somebody who thinks that something is, something that I would have thought is evil. And they'll say, I can understand why. And for this person, you can't decide that it's evil for them, maybe for you. Things are very murky. Things are very gray. There's a lot of anan va'arafel, a lot of clouds, a lot of fog. And this pasuk, Moshe, David HaMelech are being very, very clear with us when they say, if you want to be a lover of Hashem, you have to hate evil. The two things can't coexist. They are total opposites. In the same way we said that shame and joy are opposites, so too, loving Hashem and hating evil. Those two things go together, meaning those two opposites have to go together. It can't be anything but, and we have a responsibility to acknowledge and to state when something is wrong and to stand up for what is right. And beyond that, it seems not so clear what our level of responsibility is. Do we have to seek out and go out and punish those who perpetrate evil? Clearly not, right? This pasuk is telling us, you hate evil, you make a strong stand that what is right and what's wrong is wrong. Hashem's going to take care of the rest. Or zarua latzadik, uli yishrei leiv simcha. Okay, so this pasuk is, world famous. We sing it often, regularly. It's often sung when, one of the Gedolim or a big Rav, or I've been in seminaries where we sang it for our mechanchos, our female teachers who were big repositories of Torah, or zarua latzadik. Uli yishrei leiv simcha. And it's interesting, I think we just know that the word tzaddik is there. So we sing it for the people who we know to be tzaddikim, but it's really worth understanding this pasuk and all that it has to teach us. So, or zarua, light is planted, latzadik, for the righteous person. And there are a lot of ways to understand this. Some actually, I think, a little easier to relate to than others. I'm going to try to focus on those. Or zarua l'tzadik, the righteous person knows that light is often hidden. The righteous person understands that, and again, we're back to this idea of light and dark. The righteous person knows that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it isn't there. So the light, meaning referring to the justice, the righteousness of Hashem, the goodness and the kindness that we would like to see in plain sight, is very often zarua. It's very often hidden under the ground. It's planted, meaning it's growing, it's germinating. Eventually it will blossom and be visible to the naked eye. But for a long time, for however many seasons or however many months it might take, it stays hidden from our view. But the tzaddik doesn't get confused, doesn't get caught up in the fact that it's not visible all the time, because he knows Hazorim bedima berina yiktzoru, right? The tzaddik knows that the person who plants with tears will eventually harvest with great joy. That just because something hasn't sprouted yet doesn't mean the salvation isn't coming. It just means it's taking its time. It's gathering strength, right? It's building, it's gathering all of the nutrients that it needs in order to be successful once it does come out of the ground. So that is the tzaddik. The tzaddik recognizes that the light is sometimes hidden. Uli yishrei leiv simcha. And for the person who is yashar, the person who thinks straight, that person has real joy. And here's an interesting thing. I understood, we'll say, that the idea of being a yishrei leiv, of being a yosher, somebody who behaves with yashrus, straightness, yashar, right? Go straight and go straight. In Israel, those are all the directions you get. Yashar, va'az tismal, right? Go straight and then make a left, like you're supposed to know where that is. So the idea of being yashar refers to a certain type of upright straightness, the way that a person conducts themselves. They are honest, totally honest, 100%. Yashar is MS, like to the nth degree. There's no calculations. There's no, if maybe I look at it from this perspective, or if maybe I look for this loophole, I could maybe make this okay. I always understood that that's what it means to be yashar. And I think that is what it means. I'm just not sure that's what it means in this context. It's true that we have an obligation to be honest and to be straightforward in all of our dealings, 100%. But I'm just not sure that that's what David and Moshe are telling us here. Instead, I think was it Rabbi Foyer? I think it's Rabbi Foyer in his book on Tehillim. So he quotes Rav Hutner, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, the famed Rosh Yeshiva from Panovich, that the idea of Yishrei Leiv refers to people who are goal-oriented, people who are looking straight, people who are not tempted to see what that person has or what that person has, people who are focused on their goal being achieving their potential in this world, coming close to Hashem. And when a person is yashar in that way, we always say it's not good to live with blinders on, right? Because you want to notice if somebody near you is suffering or needs your compassion, needs your help. But when it comes to comparisons and looking at what other people have, right, then it's better to live with blinders on when we're noticing what people don't have and how we might be able to be helpful to them, or as a way of feeling how grateful we should be for the things that we do have. So that kind of checking out is permitted. That's maybe even encouraged, right? We want to be able to help people and offer them resources. But when it comes to what I have is what I need in order to be able to achieve my mission in this world, in that way, a person needs to be yashar, straight only. And that the very act of glancing to the side is what causes people to have a lack of simcha. We all know this to be true. The second we notice that somebody has something that we want, or we're wondering why they got it first, or why it's working out, things seem to be working out. It's always a seems to be, but we forget that part, right? Things are going so well over there, then we've taken away from our ability to be grateful for what we do have. And we don't feel good about what we have, right? We feel lacking. And that is a recipe for a lack of simcha, a lack of joy. A person simply will not feel real contentment and real happiness, real joy with what they have if they are busy not being yashar, meaning in the sense, it's true, like what we said, if they're not being honest or straightforward. But I think this understanding is also very impactful. This idea that as soon as you start to notice what other people have, that takes away from our own ability to achieve a sense of simcha, to achieve a sense of happiness, of contentment. I misquoted. That wasn't from Rifki Freundlich. That was Rabbi Pliskin. Now I'm going to tell you what Rifki Freundlich says, because it's also a beautiful idea. So that's the one way to understand this. And in fact, I saw from some of the Mefarshim, they point out that the tzaddik doesn't benefit from this, that there's a difference between the tzaddik and the yashar lev. The tzaddik might benefit from some holy, righteous, light in the world to come, and they'll benefit from the schar, the reward from all the wonderful things they've done, but they don't always experience joy in this world. If a person wants to experience joy in this world, says Rabbi Pliskin, yashar lev, keep your eye only on your own, your own Dalet Amos, your own 4 meters. Just keep an eye on your own, what's going on for each of us, and know that we have what we need in order to achieve what we're meant to achieve. Now, I just want to share with you one other idea from Rav Hutner. So Rav Hutner points out that if you look at the Targum is the Aramaic translation. So if you look at the Aramaic translation for Yishrei Lev, he translates it as, I wrote it down here somewhere, Tiritze Liba. Tiritze Liba. So a teretz, right, means an answer. So what does it mean? Uli Yishrei Lev Simcha. Yashar, he explains to be not straight, but answers. That the person who has joy is the person who has lots of answers in their heart. So he explains as follows. People who ask a lot of questions, I don't mean like philosophical, theological types of questions. I mean like people who ask a lot of questions, people who are critical, people who look for fault, people who nitpick, people who ask and who wonder, why is that the way that person said that or did that? Or why does that person have that? Or why am I the one who's dealing with this? And why not somebody else? The more questions a person has, says Rav Hutner, the less simcha they will also have. And again, he's not saying that you shouldn't ask questions, that the best way to learn is to ask questions, but he's talking about, from a quality of life standpoint, from a way that we relate to other people. If you're constantly asking questions, when we ask questions about other people's behavior, so by definition, we're not coming to a place of joy. He says, what is the Targum, what is Onkelos teaching us when he translates Yishrei Lev as Tiritze Lev? That the way for a person to have simcha, the way for a person to have joy is to always have answers, have explanations in their heart for other people's behavior. Rather than having questions, we should have answers. We should have explanations. They must have such and such going on in their life. I can't imagine what must be going on that they would have said something like that. They must really be struggling, right? Their situation must be more complicated than I realize. We're looking to explain away other people's behaviors in the same way, let's be honest, that we come up with excuses for ourselves very often for why, we were having a bad day and therefore we snapped at someone, or we weren't as patient as we would have liked to have been, or, we honked at the person in front of us instead of showing a little bit more patience, or whatever our little vices are. And certainly when it comes to the bigger things that we make mistakes about, we tend to be, not everyone, but as humans, we tend to have a lot of excuses, answers, and explanations for our own behavior. And Rav Hutner is pointing out that the people who achieve simcha in this lifetime are the people who have a lot of answers, the people who have a lot of explanations, not just for their own behavior, but for everyone else's behavior, everyone else's choices as well. Simchu tzadikim b'Hashem v'hodu l'zecher kadsho, right? Those tzadikim, and this is interesting, this fits very well with the idea that the tzaddik doesn't necessarily achieve simcha, right? We saw in Pasuk Yud Aleph that the tzaddik, we just know he's going to get benefit, but we don't necessarily know that he's going to get joy. And in fact, I saw from, where did I see it from? Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz. Pinchas Halevi Horowitz explains, I think that's the Boston Rebbe, but I didn't look it up, so forgive me if I just said that wrong, that anybody who plants, by definition, is anticipating a reward. And he talks about the idea that we have, right, that you don't want to be like the Eved who is serving the master, al menat lekabel pras, right? Don't be like the servant who is just doing the right thing in order to get their paycheck. Rather, do the right thing, lishma, right? For the sake of heaven, do the right thing because it's the right thing. And he points out that by definition, as soon as a person is anticipating a reward, is anticipating a harvest, so to speak, it takes the joy out of the process. Because you get so focused, we get so focused on what's coming and what we're going to enjoy when this process is over, that we can't possibly enjoy what it is that we're doing. It's just not possible. It's like working out so that we can eat a certain food, or, exercise, or eating well so that we can. If the whole time all you're thinking about, or all we're thinking about, is what we're going to enjoy later, the benefits we're going to have later, but we don't see any value in what we're doing while we're doing it for a specific reason. So there's no joy in that. He says the whole process is devoid of happiness. And so the following pasuk, the Tehillim has to tell us, simchu tzadikim b'Hashem, right? That there needs to be almost like an extra effort for the tzaddik who was or zarua, who was so busy planting. I don't think this is pshat. I don't think this is maybe the most literal explanation. That person needs to make an extra effort to be misameach, to have joy and to feel joy. Because if the person happens to have been doing it in order to get a reward, so by definition, the process was lacking joy. As opposed to what we said before, the yashar, the yishrei lev, those people who are straight and who are doing things because I know this is my mission, I know this is my goal, these are the things Hashem gave me, this is what I'm supposed to be using. So by definition, the process for them is joyful. Might not be easy, but it's joyful. They're living with a recognition that they have everything they need. And so the process itself, I'm coming closer to Hashem. These are the things, the tools he gave me. This must be my purpose. I feel fulfilled. I feel a sense of joy. And then the Tehillim ends, v'hodu l'zecher kacho, right? And we should recognize the concept of hodu, lehodot, to acknowledge and to give thanks to Hashem's holy l'zecher. Here translates as in Sefaria as his holy name, but obviously just the acknowledging the presence, the existence of Hashem himself, which we often do through Shem Hashem. And that is how the parak of Tehillim ends. So just interesting to note in this one parak, a lot of different references to when things are dark or cloudy, and then many instances where the idea of light, which could represent inspiration, are mentioned, both with or and with barak, with lightning. And I think we had seen it in one other place. I don't remember. But we also saw opposite experiences of both shame and joy. Same with love of Hashem and loving evil, God forbid, those things cannot exist. So it has to be love of Hashem, only can coexist with hatred of evil. And we talked about how the idea that once a person has moments of inspiration, so in the best possible scenario is that burst of inspiration, even though it's very short, even though that moment of clarity, that moment where we recognize the hands of Hashem in our lives is very brief, that the way to keep it going is to have the results really be felt in us, that we are harim kadonag namasu, that as we felt so powerful before, but now that I recognize Hashem's hand in my life, I see his greatness and his kindness to me so that it melts me. The same way that that famous story about Rabbi Akiva, how the water had an impact on the rock. I actually want to point out one thing that I saw. This is fascinating. I don't know what to do with this, but on Pasuk Yud Aleph, so I saw written in the Sefer Or Zarua is an Ashkenazi. He was a great halachic mind and a great halachic posek. I think it's the same Or Zarua, but I'm really not sure. So I didn't get to fully research it, but I saw quoted in the Or Zarua, who maybe is the same as the Or Zarua from the halachic world and maybe is not, says the following. Or zarua latzadik uli yishrei leiv simcha. If you take this sofei rashi tevos, which is the idea that you can look at not just the first letter of each word in a pasuk, but that you can look at the last letter of each word in a pasuk, and that you can draw some kind of deeper understanding or deeper lesson from that. He says, here you see our beloved Rabbi Akiva, which I was reminded of when we referenced the story with the rock, and how the water penetrated the rock. And Rabbi Akiva said, well, if water can make a hole in a rock, Torah can eventually penetrate my heart. So Rabbi Akiva, or Zarua, you see the ayin, the kuf, the yud, the vet, and then the hey, which in the Gemara, there are differences of spelling of Rabbi Akiva's name. Most modern day people spell Akiva with an aleph, but there was an approach taken at one point that Rabbi Akiva suffered so terribly that when we name people Akiva since then, we should name them Akiva with an aleph so that they don't have sort of that same mazal or, that same destiny of suffering the way Rabbi Akiva did. I think in practice, people, at least people that I'm familiar with, don't, but I do remember when we were getting Kiddush cups for our son Shlomo Akiva, that the person from the Judaica store called and asked if we spelled it with an aleph or a hey. So it must be that there are some people who spell it with a hey. But interesting that the Or Zarua, who points this out, says, of course, like he says it like it's so obvious, of course, that Rabbi Akiva and Moshe, their neshamos were very, very linked. And that Moshe, their famous midrashim about how Moshe, when he sees like the world of neshamos, that he sees the incident that takes place with Rabbi Akiva many thousand or so years later, where he is, tortured so terribly for his love of Torah. And that causes Moshe tremendous pain, right? Zu Torah v'zu schara. He cries out in pain, like, this is the Torah and this is its reward, like it can't be. And so we know that there is a real link between those two holy neshamos, and that Rabbi Akiva, some of his insights on the Torah, all of his insights on the Torah were like Moshe Rabbeinu level insights on the Torah. But I just thought that was an interesting reference, as we'll be getting into the Rabbi Akiva days of Sfirat HaOmer once Pesach starts. But I just thought that was an interesting reference to see brought out in this pasuk. And hopefully some of these ideas about moments of inspiration and the ideas of how to find real joy, which is to stay focused on our path and not necessarily look to the other side, that those kinds of things will help us connect to Hashem through simcha, connect to him through joy. And we say this specifically as we go into Shabbos, which from a Kabbalistic standpoint, I didn't even touch on any of this, but a lot of the commentaries who are more Kabbalistically based understand that, of course, we have to talk about light when it comes to Shabbos, because when Hashem created the world, and we're told that he took this special light and the Or Haganos, right, after the first Shabbos, he hid it. And we only get glimpses of it only on Shabbos. It's the Or Haganos only comes out on Shabbos. And there's, of course, a lot of discussion between Moshe and light, the light that came into the house when he was born and the light from his face, and a lot of discussions with Moshe and light. As you could see, I don't really understand any of these things. They're too much Berumo Shel Olam. They're in the highest levels of understanding that I certainly don't have. But just these ideas of light are things that we know are very much connected to Shabbos. So as we sing this song on Friday night, and we're trying to sort of tap into this special spirituality that was put in a box that only comes out once a week, only comes out on Shabbos, it makes sense. It fits very beautifully with all of these ideas about the clarity that a person could get on Shabbos. If we view light as a sort of the opposite to the darkness, the opposite to the confusion that we tend to have during the week, because our priorities get messed up and we get distracted and we just don't have time to focus. So Shabbos is that time where, as we've been talking about, there is 25 hours where we can focus and we can see more clearly what our priorities are supposed to be. Hashem gives us this special ability, this special light. I think in our day, it's it's a lot easier to understand, certainly when, we have all of these things that we think are bringing light into the world, our lights, our phones, our all of technology, et cetera. And when those get put away, so it often gives us an opportunity to see with a little bit more clarity. So I wish you all a wonderful week. Thank you so much for learning together today. And again, thank you to Sari, may your Baba Chana, may her Aliyah have a neshama, her neshama have an Aliyah. Sorry about that. Have a great day, everyone, and a great week. Take care.
Thank you, Rifki. It was really
Thank you.
much. Bye-bye.